There are movies you watch once, laugh, and move on from. And then there are movies that seem to stay with you, not just because they're funny, but because something about them feels deeper, almost hidden beneath the surface. Blazing Saddles is one of those rare films. On the outside, it looks chaotic, outrageous, even ridiculous. But underneath that wild energy lies something carefully constructed, something intentional. And years later, when Gene Wilder spoke quietly about his experience making the film, he revealed a truth that many fans had completely missed. The secret wasn't the loudest jokes or the most shocking moments. It wasn't the scenes that made audiences gasp or laugh uncontrollably. It was in something much quieter, something almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. According to Wilder, the true power of the film came from contrast, from stillness in the middle of chaos, from sincerity surrounded by absurdity. And once you understand that, the entire movie begins to feel different. When the film first came together, it wasn't smooth or easy. In fact, it was the opposite. The production was unstable, the tone was risky, and the script pushed boundaries that most studios at the time were uncomfortable even approaching. Everything about it felt like it could fall apart at any moment, and in many ways it nearly did. There were creative disagreements, logistical problems, and constant pressure from people who didn't fully understand what the film was trying to accomplish. Gene Wilder entered this environment not as the loudest voice, but as one of the most observant. He didn't try to dominate the process. Instead, he watched, listened, and slowly shaped his approach based on what he felt the film needed rather than what it seemed to demand on the surface. And what he saw was something that others didn't immediately recognize. He realized that if everyone in the film chased a joke, if every performance tried to be funny, the result would be overwhelming noise. The audience would laugh at first, but eventually, the humor would lose its impact. So Wilder made a decision that, at the time, might have seemed almost counterintuitive. He chose restraint. He chose subtlety. He chose to play his character not as someone trying to be funny, but as someone completely grounded in his own reality. In a film filled with exaggerated personalities and explosive comedic energy, he became the still center. This wasn't accidental. It was deeply intentional. Wilder believed that comedy works best when it has something real to push against. If everything is exaggerated, nothing stands out. But if one character remains calm, measured, even slightly detached, then every absurd moment around them becomes sharper, funnier, more meaningful. It creates a balance that allows the audience to fully experience both the humor and the underlying message. What most viewers didn't consciously realize was how much this approach shaped their experience of the film. They felt the difference, but they didn't necessarily identify where it was coming from. Wilder's performance didn't demand attention in the same way as the bigger, louder characters. Instead, it guided the rhythm of the film in a quieter way. It gave the audience space to breathe between the chaos, space to process what they were seeing. And that space was crucial, because the film wasn't just trying to make people laugh. It was trying to say something. Beneath the comedy was a sharp, unfiltered commentary on prejudice, hypocrisy, and the absurdity of social divisions. The humor wasn't random, it was targeted. It exposed uncomfortable truths by exaggerating them to the point where they became impossible to ignore. Wilder understood that message better than most. He recognized that if the film leaned too heavily into pure comedy, that message could get lost. The audience might laugh, but they wouldn't necessarily think. And for him, that wasn't enough. He believed that the best kind of comedy doesn't just entertain, it reveals something. It makes people confront ideas they might otherwise avoid, but in a way that feels accessible rather than confrontational. That's why his performance carries a subtle, emotional weight. Even in moments that seem purely comedic, there's an underlying sense of experience, of weariness, of someone who has seen more than he lets on. It adds depth to scenes that might otherwise feel one-dimensional. It creates a contrast that makes the humor hit harder, not softer. Over time, Wilder reflected on this approach in small, thoughtful comments rather than grand explanations. He didn't present it as a master plan or a calculated strategy. Instead, he described it as an instinct, an understanding of how comedy works at its core. He believed that audiences are more perceptive than they're often given credit for. They can sense authenticity, even if they can't immediately explain it. One of the most fascinating aspects of the perspective is how it reframes the entire film. What initially appears to be chaotic and spontaneous begins to reveal itself as carefully balanced. The loud moments feel louder because of the quiet ones. The absurdity feels sharper because it exists alongside sincerity. And the humor becomes more than just entertainment. It becomes a tool for exploring something deeper. Wilder also spoke about the collaborative nature of the film and how that balance didn't come from one person alone. It was a result of different creative energies interacting with each other. Some brought boldness and unpredictability, pushing the boundaries of what the film could be. Others, like Wilder, brought precision and restraint, shaping that energy into something cohesive. This dynamic created a kind of creative tension that ultimately strengthened the film. It wasn't always easy. There were disagreements, moments of uncertainty, and constant pressure from outside forces. But that tension forced everyone involved to be more intentional about their choices. It prevented the film from becoming one note. It ensured that every element had a purpose. Another detail Wilder revealed was how important timing was. Not just in individual jokes, but in the overall structure of scenes. He believed that comedy isn't just about what is said, but when it is said, and more importantly, when nothing is said. Silence, pauses, and reactions can be just as powerful as punchlines. In some cases, they're even more effective. This idea shaped many of his scenes. Instead of rushing through lines or emphasizing every joke, he allowed moments to linger. He trusted the audience to fill in the gaps, to recognize the humor without being guided directly to it. This approach created a different kind of laughter, one that felt more personal, more earned. What makes this revelation so interesting is that it changes how you watch the film. Once you're aware of it, you start to notice the patterns. You see how the energy rises and falls, how the pacing shifts, how certain moments stand out not because they're louder, but because they're quieter. It becomes clear that the film's impact isn't just about its boldness, but about its balance. Wilder also touched on something more philosophical, the idea that comedy and truth are closely connected. He believed that humor has the ability to reveal things that might otherwise be ignored or denied. By making people laugh, you lower their defenses. You create an opening where ideas can enter more easily. And if those ideas are meaningful, they can stay with the audience long after the laughter fades. This perspective helps explain why the film has remained relevant over time. It's not just a product of its era. Its themes, its observations, and its approach to humor continue to resonate because they're rooted in something real. The specifics may change, but the underlying ideas remain recognizable. One of the most surprising things Wilder shared was how much of this was happening beneath the surface. Even during filming, while the set may have seemed chaotic and unpredictable, there was a constant awareness, at least for him, of what the film was trying to achieve. Every choice, every adjustment, every moment of restraint was part of a larger picture. And yet, he never framed himself as the center of that process. He saw his role as one piece of a much bigger puzzle. His contribution wasn't about standing out, but about supporting the overall structure of the film. It was about creating a foundation that allowed everything else to work. This humility is part of what makes his insight so compelling. He wasn't trying to claim credit or redefine the film's legacy. He was simply sharing what he had learned, what he had observed, and what he believed made the film effective. And in doing so, he offered a new way of understanding it. For many fans, this realization comes as a surprise. The film is often remembered for its boldness, its controversy, its willingness to push boundaries. But Wilder's perspective shifts the focus. It highlights the importance of subtlety, of control, of knowing when to step back rather than step forward. It also serves as a reminder that great performances aren't always the most obvious ones. Sometimes, the most impactful choices are the ones that go unnoticed. They shape the experience in ways that are felt rather than seen. They influence how the audience responds, even if the audience isn't aware of why. In the end, what Wilder revealed wasn't a hidden secret in a traditional sense. It wasn't a behind-the-scenes story or a surprising fact. It was an understanding, a way of looking at the film that changes how you experience it. It shows that beneath the laughter, beneath the chaos, there's a carefully constructed rhythm, a deliberate balance that gives the film its lasting power. And once you see that, it's hard to unsee it. The film becomes richer, more layered, more intentional. The humor feels sharper, the message feels clearer, and the entire experience feels more complete. What once seemed like pure comedy reveals itself as something far more thoughtful. That was the insight Gene Wilder shared, not in a single moment, but gradually, over time. And it's something that many fans, even after watching the film countless times, never fully realized. Because sometimes, the most important part of a story isn't what stands out the most. It's what quietly holds everything together.